My name is Rachel Cole. I'm 39 years old, and I'm currently standing on a flagstone patio overlooking Lake Michigan, holding a sweating glass of sparkling water and pretending I don't hear someone asking if I could grab more napkins from the kitchen. From a distance, you might think this is my family, but they're not. I'm married to Elliot, yes, and technically that makes me part of this gathering, but they've never really treated me like one of them. I'm an urban infrastructure architect. I design smart road systems and sustainable transit networks for a living. I've consulted for half a dozen cities and managed teams across 3 states. But here at Elliot's family's annual summer retreat, I might as well be the caterer's assistant. I've been asked to refill drinks to fix a Bluetooth speaker, and earlier Bryn's husband actually handed me his sunglasses and asked if I could clean them. No one questions why I'm walking in and out of the main house. They assume I'm part of the help. What they don't know, what none of them know, is that this entire estate now belongs to me. I bought it 6 months ago. Every inch of this lakeside manor, from the dock where the kids are now diving into the water to the stone balcony I'm leaning on, is mine. Not in theory, on paper, on deed, legally and completely, but I haven't told them. Not yet. Carolyn is holding court near the grill, describing the difference between cold-pressed and extra virgin olive oil as if it's state policy. Bryn is recounting her yoga retreat in Costa Rica for the third time. Someone just laughed too hard at a joke about people who drive hybrid cars, and I felt my jaw tighten just slightly. I shouldn't care. I've told myself that so many times. Every August, Elliot's family returns to this place, like it's sacred land. The same rental, the same routines, morning mimosas, matching linen outfits, oysters on the half-shell by sunset. And every year I smile, I nod, I carry plates, and I somehow get left out of every group photo. No one is cruel exactly, it's more like I'm politely edited out of their reality, the polite erasure of someone they never expected to stay. When Bryn turned to me and said, "Could you be a doll and run inside for the napkins?" I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, nodded, and walked away. What would be the point of explaining that the staff already restocked the buffet, that I helped design the very kitchen she's sending me into, that I signed the closing documents for this property while she was tagging her avocado toast on Instagram? I walk slowly through the house, letting my hand brush along the edge of the dining table. The wood is old-growth oak, hand restored. I approved every detail of its refurbishment. They think they're guests in a vacation home. They don't realize they're living in my decision. Back on the patio, the sun is setting in that golden way that makes even their worst behavior look picturesque. Someone's queuing up music. I hear laughter. I see Elliot, and he smiles at me like he always does. Sweet but distant. He doesn't know either. He never asked why I started traveling more, why I've taken so many calls from lawyers lately. I guess he assumed I was just busy with city work again. But tonight isn't the night for revelations. Not yet. I'm still collecting small moments like this, still watching the way they look through me, still waiting. And when the moment comes, when the truth is finally in the room with them, I want to see their faces. Not for revenge, just for the simple pleasure of being seen. I met Elliot at a transportation planning conference in Seattle. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and asked real questions about my work, instead of just nodding politely. We married 2 years later in a courthouse ceremony with his family in the front row, all looking like they'd expected someone else to show up in the white dress. Elliot's family is the kind that moves through the world like they own it. Not with arrogance exactly, but with an effortless assumption that rooms will open and people will accommodate. His mother, Carolyn, has never directly insulted me. But from the beginning, I've known I was a question mark to her. She'd tilt her head slightly when I spoke, as if translating my words into her own language. Once during a brunch, she turned to her sister and said, "Rachel's in city stuff, right? Infrastructure. Something must be why she wears flats to everything." Bryn, Elliot's cousin, is the master of compliments that leave bruises. At a Thanksgiving gathering a few years ago, she handed me a slice of pie and said, "I love how you don't try too hard with your appearance. So refreshing." I laughed at the time, too polite to show the sting. Later that night, I went into the guest bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, wondering if my effortlessness was code for invisible. There were always moments like that, subtle, constant reminders that I didn't quite belong. I'd bring a vegan side dish to dinner and watch it sit untouched. I'd chime in on a conversation about infrastructure funding, only to be cut off by someone changing the subject to organic wine. Every time I spoke, I felt like I was handing over a gift they never asked for. And every time I stayed silent, I felt like I was shrinking just enough to fit into their picture. The first Christmas we spent together, I spent 2 weeks organizing every detail. The menu, the gifts, the music. I handmade the wreaths. At dinner, Elliot's sister gave a long toast, thanking everyone who helped make the holiday so special. She named each family member their spouses, even the florist. She never said my name. Elliot squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "You know you did most of it." I nodded, but I watched his mouth stay closed when the moment to speak up passed him by. That was always the rhythm. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who sent handwritten thank you notes, who volunteered to take photos so everyone else could be in them. But when it came to acknowledgments, I might as well have been the person behind the camera, blurry and out of focus. No one was outright cruel. They were just consistent in their dismissal. Once at a summer party here at the lake, Bryn introduced me to her friends as Elliot's wife who works in something techie, I think. She turned to me and smiled like she'd handed me a compliment. I stood there half smiling, my mouth too slow to correct her. Later, one of her friends found me near the dock and said, "You must be smart. Bryn said you're one of those app girls." I didn't bother correcting her either. Over time, I stopped trying to explain. I stopped offering up the truth of what I do or how hard I work to get there. I got my master's while juggling 2 jobs and paying off credit cards. I built my portfolio from the ground up without legacy connections or trust funds. But none of that seemed to fit into the story Elliot's family had already written about me. It wasn't just the big moments. It was the small, relentless ones. The way they never quite looked at me when saying thank you. The way Carolyn always asked if I was taking a break from work these days, as if assuming I couldn't possibly be busy. The way Elliot never noticed how quiet I became at their gatherings, or how often I volunteered to run errands just to step away. I remember once Carolyn turned to Elliot mid-conversation and said, "Rachel's good with emails, isn't she? Maybe she can help you organize your inbox." I was sitting right there. She didn't ask me. She asked him about me. Like I was someone's assistant, helpful and nearby, but not someone worth speaking to directly. And still I kept showing up. Because I thought that if I was kind enough, thoughtful enough, helpful enough, they'd eventually see me. Not just as Elliot's wife, not just as the polite woman who made things easier, but as a whole person. A woman who'd built something real and strong and hers. But over the years, that hope wore thin. I started to understand that some people aren't waiting to see you clearly. They're just waiting for you to take up less space. And for a long time, I let them have their way. I smiled, I stepped aside, I made myself useful. I stopped expecting anything else. Until one summer, that quiet erasure turned into something else. Not anger, not revenge, just a deep, still decision. If they couldn't see me, then maybe it was time I stopped waiting to be noticed. Maybe it was time I made something they couldn't ignore. It happened during our 4th summer at Lakefield. The same whitewashed porch, the same hydrangeas blooming like clockwork, and the same low hum of conversations drifting in from the patio. I had just come in to grab a sweater when I heard Carolyn's voice from the sitting room, low and easy, as if she were commenting on the weather. She was on the phone with someone, probably her sister. I could hear ice clinking in her glass. She said Rachel's harmless, really. Very sweet. But plain, you know. Nothing wrong with plain. Just not one of us. I didn't move. I just stood there, one hand on the stair rail, the other curled tight around my cardigan. She said it so gently, like it was a kindness to name me ordinary. I waited until she moved into the kitchen before I walked back out. Elliot was at the grill with his cousin Marcus. Someone had opened another bottle of wine. I slipped into the noise like always quiet and easy. No one noticed my face was pale, or that I kept my eyes down. That night at dinner, the table was a long rectangle set for 18. Carolyn had assigned the seats, of course, place cards and silver script. I found my name at the corner next to Bryn's teenage son, and across from Marcus's girlfriend, who was new and very chatty. I smiled and took my seat. 5 minutes in, Carolyn appeared at my shoulder and said, "Would you mind swapping with Aunt June? She gets cold near the fan." I nodded, stood and gave up my chair. Aunt June thanked me without looking up from her martini. The new seat was near the kitchen entrance. Each time the servers brought a dish, I had to shift to let them pass. At one point, the chair behind me bumped my elbow hard enough to knock my fork to the ground. I smiled at the server, said it was fine. My hand shook slightly when I reached for a new one. Midway through dinner, the topic turned to career moves. Bryn was launching a line of artisanal candles. Marcus had just closed a round of funding for his fintech startup. Elliot mentioned a lab project he was overseeing at the university. Carolyn turned to him and said, "You always did follow through on things, even from a young age." She smiled, lifted her glass. then looked past me, past my untouched plate, and changed the subject. I excused myself before dessert, said I had a headache. No one asked if I was okay. No one followed. Back in the guest suite, I took off my earrings and sat on the edge of the bed. I could still hear the hum of conversation downstairs. Laughter, silverware, distant jazz from the speaker in the parlor. I stared at the mirror above the dresser. My reflection looked blank, not sad, not angry, just faded, like someone who had been politely erased. Later that night, I heard voices in the hallway, Bryn and Marcus. They didn't know I was still awake. She said, she's fine. But she doesn't really belong here. Marcus laughed, said totally, not her scene. I lay still, breathing quietly. The sheets felt cold against my skin. Not because of the words, but because they said them so casually. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for my phone or pace the room. I just sat there, wrapped in stillness. A strange calm settled into me, like something I'd been gripping for too long had finally slipped out of my hands. The next morning, I went for a walk by the lake before sunrise. The air was cool, the sky a soft lavender gray. I watched the water move without sound. The dock creaked beneath my feet. For the first time in years, I stopped rehearsing what I could say to make them understand me. I stopped imagining how I might earn their approval. I realized I didn't want it anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. Too much for too long. I had tried to shape myself into someone they could see, and in the process I had disappeared. When I got back to the house, Elliot was pouring coffee. He kissed my cheek, asked how I slept. I smiled and said fine. That was the moment I knew I was done trying. From that point forward, I would still show up, still smile. But I wouldn't reach anymore. I wouldn't lean in hoping to be welcomed. I wouldn't give pieces of myself to people who couldn't be bothered to remember my name correctly. That summer was the last time I tried to belong. What came after wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, intentional, and it started that very day. With a phone call I made standing barefoot on the dock, while the rest of them passed around pastries and assumed I was upstairs getting dressed. After that summer, I stopped trying to be part of Elliot's family. I stopped waiting for their approval, their compliments, their crumbs of inclusion. I pulled all that energy back and poured it into something I could actually build. I started saying no to weekends away, no to extended brunches and wine tastings. I told Elliot I was catching up on work, and that was mostly true. But I was also building something bigger than they could imagine. I picked up freelance projects on top of my job. I consulted for regional transit departments and tech-adjacent startups that needed smart infrastructure maps, but couldn't afford the big firms. The money wasn't glamorous, but it stacked up. I stopped spending on things that didn't matter. I kept the same car for 12 years, packed lunches every day, said no to new coats even when the zipper on mine broke. I tracked every expense in a spreadsheet color-coded by week. I watched the numbers shift from red to gray to green, not fast, not dramatic, but steady. 2 years in, I opened a holding account under a name that sounded just bland enough to go unnoticed. Benton Gray Collective. I paid extra for privacy protection. My contact was a former colleague who'd moved into real estate and understood discretion. I told no one, not Elliot, not even my closest friend. I started small. Fractional shares in eco-retreat startups, a stake in a co-working chain that flopped within a year, then a vacation rental company in Oregon that barely broke even. But I kept learning, kept reinvesting, and slowly things began to grow. By year 5, I owned part of 3 hospitality companies and a minority stake in a wellness resort in Colorado. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was enough to start thinking bigger, enough to imagine what it would feel like to own a piece of something that meant something. Then last winter, a listing came across my desk. Lakefield Manor, Elliot's family's beloved summer retreat. The one they believed belonged to them through sheer tradition and charm. The listing was quiet, no photos, just a one-page summary marked confidential. I stared at it for a full hour before calling my lawyer. The asking price was brutal, more than I had in liquid assets. I moved fast, I cashed out investments, pulled from every account I'd quietly built, took out a structured loan against a commercial fund I owned through Benton Gray. My lawyer handled the transaction, the name on the deed Benton Gray Collective. I didn't tell Elliot, not because I was hiding, but because he never asked. He never once wondered why I worked late every night for months, why I traveled to meetings with no client names, why I came back from site visits with property blueprints in my backpack instead of zoning notes. I think he assumed I was busy. He said he was proud of me once during a holiday dinner, told his uncle I was consulting on a traffic signal redesign for a major city. I smiled and nodded. It was easier than explaining I'd just finished evaluating the HVAC system at Lakefield. After the sale closed, I visited the property alone. Midweek, off season, the house looked different without the crowds. Quieter, real. I walked through each room with the new manager, approved subtle renovations, new mattresses, better insulation, a modern septic system no one would notice but everyone would appreciate. I left the kitchen untouched. I knew they'd expect the old charm. I kept the decor. Repainted the porch, replaced the dock, installed solar panels behind the guest house where no one would see them. Every detail mattered. Not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted it done right. In every corner of that estate, I saw the shadows of past summers. I saw the lawn where Bryn once tripped over a bocce ball and blamed me for placing it wrong. The porch where Carolyn complained that the champagne wasn't cold enough. The room where I was once asked to move seats for someone older and more important. But now it was mine. Every square foot, every light fixture, every key and contract. I didn't smile when I signed the final document. I didn't pop a bottle of anything. I just exhaled. Long and slow, like I'd been holding my breath for years. The manager asked if I wanted to list myself as the owner on the guest welcome letter. I said no, keep everything the same logo, same signature. Keep my name off the welcome board, off the mailers, off the internal roster. I didn't need them to know. Not yet. What I wanted wasn't attention. It was certainty. I wanted to look at that house and know that I had done something they couldn't undo. Something no one handed to me. Something that was fully, quietly, completely mine. For a decade, I had been shrinking to fit into a space they never really offered me. Now I owned the space, and I still didn't need to prove it. I just needed to feel it. To stand on that land alone and unseen and know I had changed the story. Without their permission, without their applause, without even their awareness. That was enough. It was the second night of the reunion. Dinner was served in the private hall, the one with the vaulted ceiling and the view of the lake through antique glass windows. Long tables dressed in ivory linen stretched from wall to wall. Carolyn sat at the head as always, offering tight smiles and overly generous pours of wine. Bryn was mid-story about a tech investor she'd dated briefly, laughing a little too loudly at her own jokes. The plates clinked. The wine flowed. I stirred the roasted carrots on my plate and waited. I had worn a navy sheath dress. Simple, quiet. The same one I wore to my graduate thesis defense a lifetime ago. Around me, the conversation rose and dipped like background music. Every now and then, someone would glance my way. A nod, a quick smile, then their eyes moved on. The moment came quietly. The property manager, Daniel, stepped forward and tapped his glass with a spoon. It made a crisp, bright sound that cut through the hum of conversation. At first, no one noticed. Then voices dropped. Forks paused midair. He cleared his throat and smiled like someone used to commanding polite rooms. Thank you all for being here tonight. As part of our ongoing stewardship transition, we're honored to share a special announcement. Effective this season, Lakefield Manor welcomes a new majority owner. Her leadership, vision, and investment have made this transition possible. Please join me in recognizing Rachel Cole. The silence was instant, pure and perfect. Bryn's mouth froze mid-sip. Marcus turned his head like he misheard. Carolyn blinked. Just once, then again slower. Elliot's fork hit his plate. He didn't pick it up. A half second passed, then another, and then Dottie, the cousin from Boston, dropped her wine glass. It didn't shatter. It bounced, then rolled. The wine bloomed across the linen in a deep red blotch. No one moved. No one breathed. I stood slowly. My chair made the smallest sound against the wood floor. Heels steady, chin level. I stepped forward into the space between tables and looked out at the room. It took them a moment to really see me, to register that Daniel was serious, that I had not corrected him, that I wasn't laughing or waving it off. I let them look, let them take it in. I met Carolyn's eyes, then Bryn's, then Elliot's. Then I spoke. If anyone has feedback about the shrimp cocktail, I'd be happy to pass it along to myself. Someone exhaled, a quiet, shocked puff of breath. A few chairs creaked as people shifted. Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it again. Bryn's eyes widened. Carolyn's jaw moved slightly, but no sound came out. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I turned and walked back to my seat. No one clapped, No one spoke. The only sound was the soft chime of Daniel setting the spoon back on the table. When I sat, I picked up my fork and calmly resumed eating. No one else touched their food. Across from me, Carolyn's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. Bryn looked like she was trying to remember how to blink. Marcus stared at his plate like it might offer answers. And Elliot looked at me as if for the first time in 12 years he truly saw me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just let the silence stretch. Let it hold the weight of everything they never noticed. Every dismissal, every wrong name, every time I was asked to step aside, I let that silence say what I never had to. Eventually, Daniel cleared his throat again and offered a few words about the manor's future. Renovations, sustainability upgrades, community partnerships. He never looked away from his notes. The announcement ended as quietly as it began. Dessert was brought out, but hardly touched. Someone asked for coffee. Someone else left the table altogether. The rest of the night passed in a blur of stunned glances and whispered questions. I said little. I answered no one. When the dinner ended, I smoothed my dress and walked out before anyone could recover enough to form words. In the hallway, I finally let my shoulders relax. That moment was not about revenge. It was never about showing off. It was about standing still while the truth filled the room, letting them feel the absence of assumptions, letting my presence be undeniable. I walked out into the cool air and looked toward the lake. The sky was pale and quiet. A few lights twinkled on the far shore. Behind me, the dining room buzzed with confusion. But out here, everything felt still. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like I was trying to hold myself together in a place that never wanted to hold me. I felt solid, real, seen. Not one of them followed me outside, and that somehow was exactly right. The next morning, I skipped brunch. Let them sit with it a while. I walked the grounds with Daniel instead, clipboard in hand, noting which cabins needed work and which staff deserved bonuses. It felt different moving through the property with purpose instead of politeness. The employees smiled when they saw me, not because they had to, because they knew who I was now. By noon, my inbox was full. Carolyn's assistant sent a vaguely worded email inquiring about preferred booking windows. Bryn left me a voicemail dripping with tension, asking if we could talk privately. There were texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in a year. Some were warm, most were transactional, all were sudden. I didn't respond. Not right away. My legal team had already flagged the subleases. Camille had quietly made over $40,000 subletting her family's summer cabin under a fake name. We didn't threaten. We didn't yell. We sent the tax documents to the state and included the name of a reputable CPA. Elliot's uncle's lease had expired 6 months prior. No one noticed. I gave him 30 days to vacate, then donated the property to a nonprofit for disabled veterans. By the time June rolled around, the new tenants had moved in. They sent a thank you letter addressed to Benton Gray. I kept it in my drawer. When Marlene showed up unannounced in pearls and a too-tight smile, I let her talk. She gave a long, frantic speech about family appearances and Elliot's reputation. When she finally stopped, I handed her an envelope. Inside were documents detailing 3 past employee complaints that she thought had been buried. I had already addressed them. I just wanted her to know they existed. If she tried to play the victim in public, I was ready. She left without finishing her tea. I didn't follow her out. Elliot cornered me 2 days later. He looked pale and tired, like he hadn't slept since the announcement. He stood in the doorway of my office, voice low, eyes uncertain. He asked why I never told him, why I made him feel blindsided in front of everyone. I listened quietly, then I told him the truth. Because you never asked, because you never saw me. His mouth opened, then closed. He tried to explain. He said he thought I was just busy, thought I needed space, thought I didn't like talking about work at home. I told him none of that was the problem. The problem was that he never thought to wonder who I was when I wasn't shrinking to fit his family's comfort. He apologized, not dramatically, just a quiet, painful line. I didn't rush to forgive him. I said we could talk more. Later. That weekend we hosted the annual Legacy Cocktail Hour. I didn't cancel it, I didn't need to, I repurposed it. The hall glowed with designer labels and cautious smiles. No one knew what I would say, so they stayed polite. I waited until the mid-toast lull, then stepped forward. Some of you already know me. Some of you thought you did. Soft laughter, nervous energy. I clicked to the first slide behind me, an aerial rendering of the new expansion. New eco cabins, a wellness retreat, and a community dock for kayaking, all funded by an initiative called the Morgan Women's Fund. Someone near the back perked up at the name. Carolyn's expression softened slightly. Then I turned to her and said, "It's named after my mother, Cecilia Morgan. She cleaned motel rooms along the Oregon coast for 16 years, raised me alone, taught me that respect is earned, not inherited." No one clapped, that was fine. I clicked to the final slide. Also starting next season, all family leases and discounts will be reviewed for compliance and fairness. No elaboration needed. They all knew what that meant. Camille's husband turned red. Marcus looked at the floor. Carolyn's knuckles whitened against her champagne flute. I smiled, thanked them for attending, and walked out before anyone could find their voice. The next day, I walked the shoreline as the sun came up. The water was calm, glassy, the same lake where I had once stood invisible. Now I stood in full view, not loud, not cruel, just present. By the end of the week, Camille sent a handwritten apology. Carolyn emailed a short message asking if we could talk. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't being cold, I was being careful. Elliot and I had more conversations. There were tears, regrets, silence. I told him I didn't stay to be accepted. I stayed because I thought eventually he would see me, but I see myself now, and that has to be enough. This wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, a line drawn quietly but firmly in stone. For every person who's been made to feel small, unseen, or politely erased, know this. You don't need to yell to be heard. Sometimes the loudest power is the one that moves calmly with clarity and does not ask for permission. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still the kind of quiet that only comes after something has shifted. I pulled on a sweater and stepped outside, barefoot, the wooden porch cool beneath my feet. The air smelled like pine and lake mist. I walked the gravel path slowly past the cabins toward the main trail. A groundskeeper nodded as he passed, tipping his cap slightly, not because I was the owner, but because he knew me now. At the dock, I paused to watch the water. It was still and soft, like it had exhaled something it had been holding for too long. A family of guests waved as they kayaked past. Their smiles were warm, not performative. They had no idea who I was. That felt like a gift. Back at the lodge, the housekeeping staff was beginning their morning rounds. One of them offered me coffee, another just smiled. There was no tension, no tightness in their voices, just kindness. I checked my phone once. A message from Carolyn sat at the top. "Hope we can catch up, sweetheart. Just us girls." I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there where it belonged. Unread, unnecessary. Elliot found me on the terrace near the herb garden. He looked tired. He asked if we could talk. I said we could sit. We didn't speak for a long time. The rosemary bush swayed gently in the breeze. A pair of guests passed by and said good morning to both of us. Elliot turned to me, searching for something. I spoke first. I told him he didn't have to fix anything. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, but I also wasn't seeking anything from him anymore. I didn't need apologies, I didn't need understanding. I had stopped needing those things the day I realized how invisible I had made myself trying to be seen. He looked down, said he wished he had noticed sooner. I nodded. So did I. But we can't build anything new with wishful thinking. Only truth. I stood up and dusted off my palms. I told him I was going to walk the bluff trail before breakfast. He asked if I wanted company. I said not this time. As I headed down the path, I felt the lightness in my steps. No script in my head, no rehearsed smiles, just movement, just breath, just me. The old version of me would have looked back, would have wondered how I was being perceived. That version was gone, not buried, not hidden, just released. I didn't need their applause, not Elliot's, not Carolyn's, not the family's. I had my own voice now, and I could hear it clearly. Finally. If you've ever sat at a table and felt like your presence didn't matter, I want you to know I see you. If you've poured yourself into quiet work, stayed late, held your tongue, and still felt invisible, I've been there too. And I promise you this, what you're building, what you carry is real, even if no one else notices yet. You don't have to perform to earn space. You don't have to shrink so others can shine. The work you do in silence, the strength you hold when no one thanks you, it counts. Keep going, not for them, for you. Because you deserve to take up space to be heard and to be seen without needing permission.